Welcome to the Sand Science Experience, your source for the most current and impactful research and preprints in science. And hey, before we jump in, if you enjoy these deep dives, please do like and subscribe. It really helps support the Sand Science Experience. Okay, so today we're diving into something really fundamental, mitochondrial dysfunction. Basically, how problems with our cellular powerhouses impact different tissues in the body. Think of it as figuring out why, some parts of us are more vulnerable when that energy supply falters. Let's unpack this.
Right. So at the heart of it, mitochondria are these tiny organelles, the famous powerhouses, in your cells. Their main job is producing ATP, that's adenosine triphosphate, which is like the main energy currency for pretty much everything our body does. And they do this through a process called oxidative phosphorylation. Basically, converting food and oxygen into energy cells can actually use. Now, when you get mutations, either in the mitochondrial DNA itself or in the nuclear DNA that supports mitochondria, well, that whole process gets disrupted. This leads to what we call energy failure in the cells. And it's not just a small dip, it can be a really critical energy shortage.
Okay, and here's where it gets really interesting, right? Because it doesn't hit everywhere equally. One of the most striking things is how unevenly this affects us. Some tissues seem much more vulnerable than others. Why is that? What does that really mean?
Yeah, that's the key finding, really. It boils down to this. Tissues that have consistently high energy demands and also have a limited ability to regenerate or sort of dilute out the bad mitochondria. Those are the ones that suffer most. And that variability explains why we see such a wide range of clinical problems, from severe neuromuscular issues to metabolic problems. It's really about that balance between energy need and the tissue's resilience.
Okay, so based on that principle, high demand, limited resilience, who are the biggest targets then, where does mitochondrial dysfunction tend to hit the hardest?
Well, the central nervous system, the brain, is definitely right up there. Neurons are incredibly energy hungry. They need a constant supply for things like sending signals, synaptic transmission, maintaining the right ion balances. Yeah. It's nonstop. And crucially, they have very little energy stored up. So even a short power outage from faulty mitochondria can cause big problems pretty quickly.
Right. And that's
when we see things like encephalopathy, that's sort of general brain dysfunction, or stroke-like episodes, seizures, things you see in specific syndromes like MELAS or Leigh syndrome.
Okay. And what about muscles? I mean, they do a ton of work too.
Exactly. Skeletal muscle is another major player. It needs a huge amount of energy, especially during contraction when you're moving. And like the brain, it has a somewhat limited ability to just replace or dilute out those defective mitochondria. That's why if you do a muscle biopsy on someone with mitochondrial disease, you often see these classic signs like ragged red fibers.
Ah, yeah, I've heard of those. What are they exactly?
They're basically clumps of abnormal mitochondria that build up and stain bright red with a specific stain. It's a visual clue. And clinically, this translates into muscle weakness, really significant fatigue, and exercise tolerance, finding it hard to keep going physically.
It's quite sobering. Okay, what about the heart? It's working constantly nonstop.
Yeah, the heart muscle, the cardiac muscle, has incredibly high and constant energy needs. It needs efficient ATP production all the time. So when mitochondrial function dips, you often see cardiomyopathies. It's problems with the heart muscle itself. It might get too thick or too weak, or issues with the heart's electrical system, the conduction pathways. These can be really serious, sometimes even leading to sudden cardiac death. The heart is just extremely sensitive, even to relatively small problems in those mitochondrial enzymes.
Wow. So beyond the sort of big three brain, muscles, heart, are there other key areas listeners should be aware of?
Oh, absolutely. Other organs are definitely at risk too. Your liver and kidneys, for instance. Even though they have some ability to regenerate, they are highly metabolically active and need continuous ATP for all their filtering and processing jobs. So you can see things like liver failure or specific kidney problems like renal tubular defects.
And our senses too, right?
Yes, definitely. Sensory organs like the retina in your eye or the cochlea in your ear, they have very specialized cells with high energy demands. Think about conditions like Leber's hereditary optic neuropathy, LHON, which directly impacts vision due to mitochondrial issues in the optic nerve. And it doesn't stop there. Endocrine organs, like the beta cells in your pancreas that make insulin, they're also quite susceptible because releasing hormones properly takes a lot of energy.
That makes sense. It really touches so many systems. Does age factor into this? Does it present differently depending on how old someone is?
It absolutely does. In newborns and infants, mitochondrial dysfunction often shows up as really severe multi-system disorders. It hits the organs that are developing rapidly, like the liver and heart, very hard. But then in older children and adults, the picture often shifts. it tends to manifest more as neuromuscular problems or neurological impairments. Things like CPEO, chronic progressive external ophthalmoplegia, which affects eye movements, become more common. And this is often linked to the gradual buildup of mitochondrial DNA mutations over a lifetime.
Okay, so bringing this all together, knowing about these tissue-specific vulnerabilities, what does that actually mean for diagnosing and treating these conditions? And, why is this detailed understanding important for people to grasp?
Well, it's incredibly important for diagnosis. Understanding which tissues are likely to be affected guides doctors on what tests to run. That's why things like muscle biopsies, specific genetic tests looking for those mutations, or neuroimaging techniques like MRI scans are used. They're targeting the vulnerable areas. And for treatment, knowing which organs are struggling helps tailor interventions. It's not a one-size-fits-all situation. You need to support the specific needs of the affected systems. So why should you care? Because this knowledge directly translates into better, earlier diagnosis and more targeted, potentially more effective management strategies for these really complex disorders. It improves care.
Right. So to kind of wrap up this deep dive, the takeaway is that mitochondrial dysfunction really hits hardest where the energy demands are highest and resilience is lowest, primarily your brain, skeletal muscles, and heart. But other systems like the liver, kidneys, and sensory organs are significantly impacted too. It's this complex interplay between energy needs and how well a tissue can cope. And this understanding, it's not just, interesting science, it's providing a really solid foundation, a framework for future research. The goal is developing targeted therapies and refining how we diagnose these conditions, which ultimately should lead to better care and outcomes for individuals affected by them. That's all the time we have for today. Remember to like this deep dive and subscribe for more insights from the SAN Science Experience. We'll see you next time.